Hello and welcome. This video is going to wear two hats, so you may have got to this video in two different ways. It's going to be, I think it's part 5 of the multiplayer menu plugin tutorial, and then this is section 7, part 1, multiplayer setup for the RTS framework. Same stuff that I needed to cover, so this is so for the multiplayer menu, it's going to show you how to incorporate the multiplayer menu into a new project. And for the framework, we're going to incorporate a multiplayer menu for testing. I'm going to be using my multiplayer menu from my multiplayer menu tutorials. If you haven't done that or you do not want to use that, then you can skip this step and set up a different multiplayer setup. It's going to involve using, if you watch the first video in the series, it'll explain the whole thing and what we're going to use, but it uses the common UI, common user, common game. I think it has modular gameplay actors plugin as well, and it's going to change what we need to inherit from. So player controllers will need to inherit from common player controller, and your game instance will need to inherit from common game instance. And there's a few other things for setup, but if that's going to be an issue for your project, don't do this multiplayer setup. But this multiplayer setup works with the game data and the setup that we have for the framework, as in like launching games and whatnot. So what this will give us is the ability to properly test multiplayer. And I think that's what we're lacking at the moment. The project I developed this stuff in has this multiplayer in it, but I'm finding it difficult to test without multiplayer in the actual framework. I was trying to avoid it, but I don't think it's a good idea. I need to actually run multiplayer in the framework, so that it's going to take a bit of a sidebar and get multiplayer in here, and then we can go through and fix some issues that I've been having with selection, spawning guys, and some people already doing the tutorials have had those issues, and I want to address them, but I don't think we can properly address it until we get multiplayer in. So that's where we're at. That's what we're going to do. So we're going to start in the editor now, and we're just going to go to plugins, and we need to add, so the only plugin that we can add through here is Common UI. And to be honest, any project you're doing, just turn this on. It is just so much better. Like, you get all sorts of features. I cover the features in the multiplayer menu intro video. It's awesome, right? So you just use it in every project. You don't need to use any of the other common plugins, just use this one. It's awesome. So we're going to use that, and the rest of the plugins, they come from Lyra. So you need to get the version for your Unreal. So what you need to do, and I'm pretty sure I covered this in the multiplayer menu tutorials as well. But if you're just adding this to your project like I am now, maybe you have the multiplayer menu, and I'm pretty sure I made it in 4.3. Sorry, 5.3. So 5.3 is what I'm using now for this framework. So, but if you're doing this in 5.4, which is fine, I don't think there'll be any issues, but you will need to go and update those the common UI is fine because the editor will know what version you're using, but when we drag in these other ones, let's just, I'm going to come back to File Explorer. So this is my framework project here. I'm just going to come into plugins. And now if I'm grabbing mine from my the actual plugin here. So good. So this is the plugins directory on my multiplayer. That's just the project name. But if this is the Lyra plugin, you'll have a similar setup. So you want the common game, common user, and modular gameplay actors, and it just needs to be Lyra 5 point whatever you're using. So I'm just going to copy these in here. And I'm also going to copy my multiplayer menu. And get rid of that. And then that's all we need to do, like, file-wise. So in here now, if we come into config, probably need to add some stuff in here later, but we'll just add some online subsystem settings here. So that's just saying, we're not using Steam, we're just using a local, like a LAN subsystem is what the null subsystem. Now in the default game, we need to point to what's called a UI policy. And this is part of the common UI using that system setup. Actually, I might leave that because we'll fire up the editor and get the exact reference path. So in our source project here, so your actual project, not plugins, we just want to add some dependencies for our multiplier. This is suits from the future. I'm just updating what I did here. So the only includes that you'll need in the actual source in the framework build is common game and the modular gameplay actors down here. And that's because we're using those two plugins in our framework here, so they both get referenced when we change our player control later on. So now that we've installed the plugins, we need to also rebuild the project. So we'll go back to our project directory and delete the temporary files and rebuild the project. So once your project's finished recompiling, and so now let's see if we can build. So that's built fine for me. If you have any problems with that, feel free to join the Discord and get some help there. The link is in the description. It's not going to change anything, right? We've just installed some plugins and we need to start using them. The first steps are going to be to come to project settings. There's a few things we need to do. So this local player class, we need to change that to the common local player. We also need to change the game instance. Oh, we've actually got a class, so we'll need to modify that class. We'll do that. The other one is the game viewport. Change that to the common viewport client. So the only one we need to change is the game instance. So let's come back to our C++ here. In our framework, I don't believe we do have a game instance. Oh, that's for the project. Yeah. So this needs to inherit from common game instance. Why this is doing this? Oh, that's because it doesn't have. So this is where we need to add, what's the one? So the common game instance, I believe, is in common game. We're going to need common game in here. And while we're in here, we might as well add common user. We're going to need that as well. In fact, I do. So this should, I might just remove this again. I might rebuild again. Yeah, so I just had to rebuild again. I'm not sure why, what's going on there, but now it's properly referencing common game. So if you're getting those weird, like it's not linking to things properly, just rebuild again. Not sure why it does that, but there it is. Yep, that's our common game instance. And the other one we need to change is our player controller. So player controller, instead of a player controller, a common player controller, and include player. Don't need game framework one anymore. Don't need the engine game instance. And if you have a look at these, all they're doing is inserting, the additional functionality between the game instance common class. So, and this is what we want. And same for the player controller. So it's adding this modular one as well, but it's just adding a few functions. The modular one's adding the modular stuff, and that's inheriting from the A player controller. So we're just inserting some additional classes in the chain. I'll just refire up the launcher. We're getting linker errors for the common plugins, not common player controller. I'll show how to fix these warnings in a minute, but I don't think that's the... Well, let's just do it just in case it is. So if we come to our core U plugin, it wants the plugins listed here. So This that'll stop. Basically saying this project depends on those modules. Hate link errors. I think what might be happening here is because our player controller, it starts in the core and then in entities, we inherit from the core. So we need to add stuff to this as well. So we're only going to need common game for now. That's where the player controller stuff is. And then down here, we'll add the modular gameplay after. So if that fixes our, that's all good. The last setting we want to set is in the default game ini, we want to assign the default policy. The reason why we have to do it in here is because it just doesn't have a, like a project settings setting, like we changed the common game instance and the local player and all that. This is sort of similar, but it doesn't have a setting, so we're doing it manually in here. And the setting we're after is in the, so I'll show you what I'm going to point to. So if we come to the multiplayer menu, and in the framework UI, we've got this UI subsystem. And in the parent class, there's a default UI policy, and that's what we need to assign. So we just want to assign something. Let's just copy that. That'll be what we're assigning. I've spelt this wrong, so it's got to be the same spelling of whatever your plugin is. Correct spelling, but anyway. Thought I fixed it. Maybe I didn't. And then we want the name of the class that we're going to set it on, which is RTS Game UI Manager Subsystem. Or whatever you've called it, if you've called it something different. And then in the editor, if we come into multiplayer content, framework, yep. And so this is the policy and the primary game layout. And in the policy, just make sure that primary game layout is assigned. But we want the reference path for this policy, and then paste that in here, and we just remove the front part there and the quote, and we add a C on the end for the default version, not an instance, basically. That should assign our policy now, so that is good. So I'm going to end this video here because if you're following the multiplayer menu and you're just watching this video to integrate this into some other project, then the implementation part, getting the menu working, is it's already sort of handled in the multiplayer menu. But if you're doing the framework, we need to do some more work to integrate the multiplayer menu with the framework. So we'll handle that in the next part. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.